What's up, everybody? It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and on this channel, we break down the trials and cases you care most about so you can understand how the American civil and criminal justice system works. And we try to make sure you understand what your rights are in every situation, which is why we try to walk you through the entire legal process while also answering your insightful questions along the way. And while it's not legal advice, it's always exciting. So buckle up for another episode of The Lawyer You Know. What's up, everybody? It's Peter Tragos here, lawyer you know, talking more Idaho for Bryan Kohberger. Something really interesting came across my Twitter timeline today, so I wanted to talk about it before the day really started because I know everybody's going to be talking about this pretrial hearing. We're going to break it down tonight, probably around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. But I thought it'd be interesting to try this time. We don't ever do anything this early. This may be the first ever video we've done before 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. I'm at my house. We're kind of redoing the, if you want to call it studio, makeshift studio I have in the study. So we're still working on a bunch of different things. This is just my computer camera and lights aren't set up or anything like that yet. There is a light on, but it's obviously not set up in the right place. So we're working on that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk the members only stream, which I think is going to be cool. It's a different time for all of you, which I know a lot of people can't come on or make the lives because of the time difference. Alex B, yes, I've played Paul Messia. Very nice. Good course to walk. But Bryan Enton, which everybody knows, is covering this case ad nauseum, getting all of the information, bringing it to everyone that follows him on Twitter. I encourage everyone to follow him on Twitter if you're interested in this content. But he just posted a 3-part interview with Bryan Kohberger's public defender in Pennsylvania. And this public defender has already made other statements. He's already been interviewed on other media platforms, but this one to me was a little more detailed. It's almost 20 minutes long. I only have about 30 or 40 minutes here before I have to start this very weird day I have today. I've got a board meeting for one of the organizations I'm on the board. I've got hopefully something cool around 4 p.m. tonight. If you guys go on Twitter, somebody asked for suggestions of guests. And if you want me to go on, then go comment at Tragos Law, which is my Twitter handle, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram there. So we just have a bunch of stuff going on. I wanted to make sure I got this out before the hearing so we could focus on it, see what we learn from it, right? See what lawyers say. And if you guys have questions, I'm, of course, going to answer them. So hit that like button on the video if you haven't already. People will probably be trickling in. Most people will probably watch this as part of the rewatch crew. And if you do, get your questions in the comments and let me know what you think. We're really close to 175,000 subscribers. That's going to be our next giveaway. We're going to give away something we've never given away before. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. But let's get to it here.
Mr. Labar, when you first met Bryan Kohberger in Pennsylvania, what was your first impression?
When I met Bryan Friday night, the night he was arrested, Bryan was very cordial. He was calm. He was aware of what was going on. He was shocked by the arrest.
Okay. Calm and aware of what was going on. Those are important things when we talk about insanity or competency, especially with Lori Vallow in Idaho. We know they'll stop the entire process if somebody's deemed incompetent. As far as is somebody testifying that saw him right away, he understands this process. He understands what's going on, and they go even deeper into that.
But he certainly was easy to talk to, very intelligent, and I really had no issues talking to him.
Did you talk about the details of the case?
When I walked into the room and I shook Bryan's hand, before Bryan could even, I think, say hello, I basically cut him off and said, Bryan, I'm merely your attorney for your extradition. I don't want to know any of the details about the actual facts or circumstances of the case or the allegations against you. That's for your attorney once you get to Idaho to talk about. I'm simply here to talk about the extradition and the elements surrounding the extradition proceedings.
So that's been his story the entire time. And I say his story, that makes it seem like it's not true. That's what he has said the entire time. And I believe that is the truth. But he also says later that he met with him for over an hour. So how do you just tell him you're only here for the extradition if you're there only an hour? But we'll hear a lot more kind of happen in this conversation. Not to say they discuss the facts of the case, but we are going to get his take on the probable cause affidavit and what he thinks about those facts. There's a lot of things we can read between the lines listening to this attorney's interview.
Did you get the sense, because he was getting his PhD in criminology and had his master's, that he had a good understanding of the process more so than like a regular client you may have?
Well, you have to understand the clients that I normally have don't even have a high school education, let alone a degree from a college. So it was much easier to talk to him about how things would proceed and how the hearing would go than my usual clients, being a public defender. But yeah, it was pretty easy to talk to him. He was aware. He did ask questions about how things would go. He wasn't fully aware of the legalese behind the hearing and what would be expected. But I certainly know, after explaining to him, he understood.
So again, he understood, which these are admissions now at this point from an attorney that had these confidential conversations with a client. I think it's interesting that he's doing these interviews. And a lot of you are already asking, does the gag order apply? I don't think the gag order applies to the lawyer in Pennsylvania. Serotonin said, Erica asked, I would like to know also, why is this guy isn't under the gag order? So I think it's actually arguable whether or not he is. He's not an Idaho barred lawyer. He is barred in Pennsylvania. So theoretically, he's not, and he's still not part of Bryan Kohberger's defense team. So there is an odd feeling, Beth, about him doing these interviews, but I don't think he would be under that gag order. There may potentially be an argument for it, but I really don't think he's under this gag order. However, seeing that gag order, knowing the process, if it were me, and knowing the process and part of the process I played in this case, and already talking to Bryan Kohberger and knowing that they don't want these types of interviews to happen because they don't want to negatively affect the case, that would probably keep me from doing these kinds of interviews. Not to say there's anything ethically wrong with it. It's just interesting. And we're going to learn from it. It's content that we get from the case that we otherwise wouldn't have if he didn't do these interviews. So we're going to learn from it. We're going to see what he says. We're going to see if there's anything we can garner from it. But it is an interesting question knowing the gag order is out there. However, I will say, I really don't think he did anything in this interview to hurt Bryan Kohberger's case, hurt Bryan Kohberger's defense. In fact, he may have shed him in a positive light throughout this interview. But let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you think this was overall positive or negative for Bryan Kohberger, because it's very strange, and most criminal defendants would not want their public defenders going out and doing interviews like this. He didn't choose this lawyer. This lawyer was appointed to him. He didn't get to choose when and how this process happened. This lawyer was on him. I do think there's some attorney-client privilege here, J. Michael RN, that could get into some gray areas, and we'll point that out when we get there. But there are certain things that he actually says Bryan Kohberger told him he could release to the media, and all that is still to come. Somebody else asked, does anyone know if the pretrial hearing today is being live streamed? It is allowed to be recorded, so we are going to eventually get audio and video recording of it, I believe, across News Nation. Other stations are doing it as well, but it's not going to be live streamed, which is interesting, and we'll see how that could potentially affect the case here as well. A lot of you are saying you don't think he should be talking at all. And yeah, I want to know, do you think this was appropriate? Do you think this was inappropriate? To me, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I don't think it crosses the line as being unethical or anything like that.
Why did you decide to release the information about the Indiana police stops? Because I think we got.
This is a great question by Bryan. So he's not just there, kissing this guy's feet. He's saying, you released this information about the Indiana stops. Why did you do it? And this is one of the worst answers I think the attorney gives. He gives some really good answers throughout this interview, but this one almost feels like, I did talk about this and here's how I got to it, but not great.
We got it from you first that those stops had happened.
I think it is accurate. It came from me. It really just came in conversation with Bryan and his father. I was aware that I was.
So now he's revealing that he had conversations with Bryan and his father. That's the type of stuff that, if I'm defending a criminal in this situation, or a suspect or an alleged murderer in a situation like this, I'm not revealing any of the conversations I had with him, with his father. Is it confidential anymore when his father's there? No, under most states. So there's another party in the room. Sometimes if it's a parent, then that will fall under the rule, depending on the rules of evidence there and the rules of ethics. But I don't know. I wouldn't be revealing that this conversation even happened.
I was trying to make sure that they knew the date that they came back from Pullman, just to make sure that it establishes that he would have been in and around the area at the time. The incident never contested. He had been in Washington State University up until mid-December. But when I talked to his father, he had talked about being stopped on the way home twice by Indiana State Troopers, twice back to back. So it's something his father had told the FBI or Idaho State Police or Pennsylvania State Police, whoever interviewed Michael here in Pennsylvania. He had already told that to authorities, so I felt comfortable saying it as part of one of the interviews that I had done that he had.
So at the end of the day, he says it had already been revealed to authorities, which doesn't necessarily make it public, but he's saying they were already telling other people, therefore it wasn't a big deal that I told him, and that's fine. But again, you just always have to be careful in these situations and hyper-vigilant to protect the client's rights.
He had been stopped because I felt a little suspicious about it, that he may have been followed from Washington State, although I think...
And that's fair, to be suspicious about it.
That has been debunked to some degree.
So when you were representing him in Pennsylvania, and I saw you in court, obviously you had limited information. Then when we got here to Idaho, the probable cause was released. What was your reaction? I'm assuming you've read the 18 pages. What was your reaction to all of that evidence?
I immediately was given the affidavit of probable cause when it was released, if I recall correctly, by... I'll restate this then, Brian, so it's clear. I'm just trying to remember who actually gave it to me the second it came out.
So this is interesting, too. Let's hear how he got the probable cause affidavit.
So I immediately read the affidavit of probable cause. I believe a news media outlet that I had been in touch with sent it to me the second it was released.
A news media outlet sent it to him the second it was released. Listen, and it's totally fair if you guys want to point the finger at me and say, you're a lawyer, you're talking about this stuff, you're giving your opinion on this stuff, you're breaking this stuff down, you're reading the probable cause affidavit, people send it to you on Instagram and whatever, you guys all send it to me, and that's totally fair. And somebody even said, law enforcement did an interview with People magazine, so there's that. The difference is, when you actually represent a client, it's very different than talking about a different case, which is why I don't talk a ton about my cases on here. But I also think law enforcement, which I wish they wouldn't do these interviews as well, but we learn from them and can kind of understand where they're coming from. But as far as the presumption of innocence for the alleged defendant or the alleged suspect in this case, it's different, right? Because they don't represent him either. So it's a different box that you're put in when you represent somebody in this situation, even if it's a limited appearance.
I read over it 4 times, I think, until I soaked it all in. And obviously what I had read, I now had an understanding of the evidence against him because I had been working in the blind the entire time because I didn't have access to the affidavit of probable cause or no.
So he was working in the blind, yet he said he didn't want to know the information that he told Bryan. He told Bryan he didn't want to know the facts or the information. So I wouldn't say working in the blind if really all you're doing is dealing with extradition. Miranda said, do you think he talked to Bryan's lawyer about the interviews beforehand? I hope not, because if he's talking to Bryan's lawyers and he's assisting in their defense and he's an agent of Bryan's or Bryan's lawyers or the public defenders there, then he would be subject to the gag order. If he is still an agent of the defense working on the defense in this case, he would still be subject to that gag order via the public defender in Idaho. And the public defender in Idaho, my dad and I kind of went over this, they could be punished for this interview if he is their agent. I'm not saying he is, but it does seem like he's had at least some contact with the public defender's office in Idaho, and he mentions it later in the interview.
Know anything about the facts and evidence that they had against them to verify the arrest.
What was your reaction, though? Were you surprised by the amount of evidence? Did you think it was solid?
I stated a couple times to other individuals and other outlets that.
So he's admitting here, he's talked to other outlets, he's talked to other individuals. I've seen other shorter interviews, but I thought this one was the best and just recently posted by Bryan.
The way I would classify it, based upon my experience doing this for 17 years, read about 25 homicide affidavits of probable cause at least, and represented several homicides, capital homicides through trial. I wasn't too surprised. I thought it was a strong circumstantial case that had holes and that could be exposed by a competent, good defense attorney like.
So he wasn't too surprised. I'm not sure what he means there because he didn't know the details of it, but maybe he wasn't surprised at how strong the evidence was. And he said it's a strong circumstantial case they can poke holes in. And I actually think here is one of the best parts of the interview that's just really interesting. And some of the stuff we've already discussed on here is how he would attack this evidence, where the holes would be poked from a purely criminal defense perspective. I don't think he's ever been a prosecutor. He's a public defender. I think he's been a public defender for 17 years, he said. So we're going to get a little good perspective here and we can talk about some of his theories of defense.
Attorney Taylor, I felt.
What would you say the biggest holes are?
And he also said the Attorney Taylor, who's Bryan Kohberger's public defender now, is going to do a good job on the case, I believe he said, which is the first indication that maybe they've spoken or they know each other.
I have been talking about like the biggest evidence and going step by step because defense is going to attack each part of the evidence separately, really, because the Commonwealth's case is really based upon circumstantial evidence. There's no direct evidence against Bryan. So their case is in the whole, whereas defense will be attacking each piece of evidence individually, I believe. At least that would be my trial strategy. So if you talk about the sheath being found in the room, you have DNA recovered from the button of the closure of the sheath. What you can say about that is it's transferred DNA, it's touch DNA. That DNA could be on there. Nobody knows how long, if undisturbed. Certainly it could be a year, it could be longer. Experts going to testify that obviously it was placed on there because Bryan touched it, but they can't say when.
So obviously it was there because Bryan touched it. I don't think Bryan's attorneys are going to admit that at this point. I think there's still some expert testimony and some evidence that's going to have to come out that actually is Bryan's DNA, and that he did touch it and it didn't come from him touching something else that touched the sheath. So that's the first thing I wouldn't necessarily admit. But he's basically saying the best argument they may have is that could have been from a year ago. It could have been stolen. We don't know. Is there any record that it was stolen? Bryan tried to get it replaced. Maybe he filed an insurance claim. So more evidence to come. Just like there's more evidence to come from the probable than what's in the probable cause affidavit, which they get to later. But even he, the public defender that was on this case at some point, is breaking down the evidence that was explained in the probable cause affidavit.
He touched it. Now, there could be additional evidence that comes out about that sheath. One being it could be actual DNA on it. The state police executed a search warrant of Bryan's blood when they were here in Pennsylvania. And we don't know if that's additional evidence that may come out if there's unidentified blood on the sheath. In addition to the sheath, the knife itself, obviously not found, but we don't have the results of the autopsy, so we don't know if it's consistent with a straight edge weapon or not. Certainly that would change my feelings about the affidavit of probable cause too.
All right, so that's the end of part 1. We will hop over now to part 2. We got a couple new members in here. P-Hop almost missed the notification. It's probably, it may have been my fault. I don't know how YouTube does their notifications, but I just posted this like 30 minutes before I actually did the video. Patrick Mott, good morning, everybody. All right, let's get to part 2 of 3. So it's 3 parts. That was part 1. We're going to be pressed for time here, but we'll make it happen.
You have mention of a van's footprint in the affidavit of probable cause. They don't match that with Bryan. I would say that
So again, we don't know if they've matched it to Bryan yet, but he does make a good point here because there's so much evidence out there, so many videos, body cams, social media posts. He picks something out that he found another video, which tells me he's looking into all this stuff. He's doing his own research online. He's following social media. He is invested in this case and trying to understand what happened in this case. Kurt just asked a very good question. What's up, Kurt? I didn't know you were in the chat, buddy. How did you get the microphone in purple? That looks pretty cool. Well, guess what, Kurt? I ordered it in black and they sent it to me in purple. So that's how you get it in purple. I literally have no idea. It just showed up in purple. I almost sent it back and I was like, whatever. I don't really care. Okay. So let's keep watching here.
I reviewed a couple, I think it's at least one video of a previous encounter of the police at the home of the victims.
So again, he's reviewed videos of previous encounters of police at the homes of the victims, but he didn't ask Bryan about the details of the case, which I believe. But this means he's looking into it after the fact, and he's following along with it with all of us. And he has information that not all of us have. And I think it'd be okay for him to, cover or talk about this case. I would just leave out the part of any interaction I had with the defendant personally. What would you do, Kurt?
where the individual who answers the door is actually in a pair of Vans. I know I saw that and I pointed that out last time I saw it, because that's what was interesting about that to me in the affidavit probable cause. Now, again, it could come back that Bryan has a pair of Vans that could possibly match that. Talk about the vehicle. The vehicle's interesting because, I mean, there is no direct evidence that it's Bryan's vehicle. They used the cell phone pings, tower pings, to link the vehicle to its whereabouts the night close to the home. They use that to track it, allegedly, but there's really no evidence that it's still Bryan's vehicle. You have the license plate on the back, not on the front. I understand that, but I'm sure it's still not the only white Hyundai Elantra 2011 to 2016 that would match that description in the area. And you have no one that places Bryan behind the wheel of the vehicle. So again, another hold in regards to that, because you can't verify that he's the one driving the vehicle.
But they don't have to put all of that in the probable cause, though, right? I mean, could they know that?
No, absolutely not. This is just holes that I got from the affidavit of probable cause that the prosecution could clearly clear up, right? And really, you anticipate it as defense counsel that they're going to have additional evidence to clear this up. The one that's going to be difficult is the cell phone tower pings, though, found to clear up, because Bryan's phone was off from approximately, I think it's 2:30 to 4:30 or 4:45. I don't know the exact times.
And here's Kurt's comment, if you want another lawyer's perspective on this. What's really interesting is, I've talked to a lot of criminal defendants before charges. Like, people hire us sometimes before they even get charged, after charges, before arraignment, whatever, all different parts of the case. And the interesting part about talking about it after you've spoken to the defendant, even if you say, which I do believe, again, I want to keep reiterating, that this lawyer told Bryan Kohberger he doesn't want to talk details, so Bryan didn't necessarily reveal any details or whether or not he did it or anything like that to him. Actually, there's more on whether or not he did it. But when you start talking about the case, it's hard for people not to think you have a context that the rest of us don't have, and that you have details that the rest of us don't have. And you can even say, like, well, this is a good hole to poke in the evidence. Maybe he knows whether or not Bryan Kohberger has Vans. I don't know. And that's the interesting part about talking about a case that you were actively involved in and you actually had representation and attorney-client privilege, and all of that just makes it very different. So I agree with Kurt's comment here.
In cell phone tower pings, we like to call it, as defense counsel, junk science, not exact science. The cell phone tower ping is that when you send a signal out, it pings off of a tower. When it hits that tower, it creates a radius as to where you could be placed around that tower. Now, this was approximately, as the crow flies, 8 miles away, I believe. And cell phone tower ping information usually is a 20-mile radius. That's how the expert is going to testify. The only way to get around that is if there's GPS evidence. Now, so when he turned his phone on, or right before he turned it off, you're going to have GPS evidence up until the point, likely, of that in a cell phone dump. And then you're going to have GPS location the second it gets turned back on. That's not in the affidavit of probable cause. It's certainly through the 60,000 plus pages that'll be generated from a forensic review of his cell phone. So certainly
the point is, there are going to be arguments made by experts on both sides with the cell phone pinging and the car data. We just don't have enough info there yet.
More evidence that you're going to be looking at. Again, there's a lot of things. It's like I said, it's a little, I'm saying it contradictory, that it's a strong circumstantial, but there's holes. I anticipate those holes to grow smaller when the prosecution puts their entire case on it and collects all their evidence, but maybe not. I don't know. But there are certainly holes in the case, and the affidavit of probable cause is just a start. We're in the infancy of the case, and I really do pretty much bank on the Commonwealth. Well, I say Commonwealth because it's Pennsylvania, but the prosecution coming up with more evidence, obviously.
The statement that you released from Kohberger, where he, said that he was innocent, essentially, did you write the statement with him? I don't know if you can share how.
This is the biggest revelation to me. So he says, you made the statement that Kohberger is innocent or is going to, can't wait to be exonerated, or whatever the quote was. This is the biggest revelation about, and here's my question. Did Bryan say he's innocent? Did Bryan Kohberger say he's innocent? because we can listen to this. We heard the statement. We read the statement together. Did he actually say he was innocent? Let's listen to how the attorney actually does reveal this conversation that he had with Bryan. This is communications with Bryan, but again, I think it seems like Bryan told him this is something he can share with the media, and that's why he shared it then and is again sharing it now.
How that statement came about.
The statement came about Friday night when I talked to him. I to understand, on Friday, from we were closed, we had a half day. So I knew I wanted to plan out sort of the attack of what I wanted to get done. You know, what I know I needed to have get done because of the media exposure I anticipated with the case. I didn't expect it to be like this. I didn't expect it to be more, I've been told by the AOPC, which is court administration, that really more calls than were on Cosby. They were calling about this.
There's more interest on this case than Bill Cosby. That's pretty wild.
So
there are celebrity cases and there are high-profile cases. They are not always the same.
Sort of got a heads up of what to expect. So I sat down in my office at 12 noon on Friday, and I wanted to plan this out as to what I wanted to get done. Two things that I felt most important is making contact with the Idaho Public Defense Commission.
So he's been in contact with the Idaho Public Defense Commission, which I think is interesting. Thank you, Bobby Cat. Yeah, over 5,000 in the chat now for an early morning live. I'm pretty surprised at that. I did not think everybody was going to show up this early. Hit that like button if you haven't already, so anybody else that's interested in this content can take a listen and look at this prior to the pretrial hearing, which we probably won't have a ton of information on until afternoon Eastern time.
Obviously, talking to Bryan as soon as possible, getting a statement out based upon my conversation with Bryan, obviously, talking to the family and getting potentially another statement out. And really from noon to approximately 4:30, I took time to search relevant Idaho law, in reference, what Bryan would expect upon extradition and returning back. So then I went out to the jail at 5 o'clock. I know there was a lot of news media outlet at the jail at that time. But I knew it was dark out, so I could essentially sneak in under the cover of dark and be able to talk to him without anyone knowing that I was actually there. And I spoke to him for about an hour. I let him know about the statement, that I wanted to get a statement out there because with all of the news media, I knew there was going to obviously be issues as far as him receiving potentially a fair trial.
So he knew there was going to be a ton of media attention on this case very early on. Let's remember that when we think about the context of everything, because context is important. Number two, he was worried that he wasn't going to get a fair trial, which I think is great. And anything you can do to help that is really important as a public defender in a situation like this. And maybe he thinks this is the best way to help that. And he's gonna explain that's why he did the statement in the first place. Yes, Patrick Mott, we are so close to 175. Hit it now. If we get it by tonight, I'll be giving some stuff away in tonight's live. But let's finish up here.
People jumping to conclusions, automatically you worry about the presumption of innocence and the integrity of the.
Because there wasn't this many people on when we first started, just to give context, this is Bryan Enton. He's a reporter who's been on this case from the jump. He's interviewing Bryan Kohberger's public defender in Pennsylvania. His Pennsylvania public defender is really talking a lot about his interaction with Bryan. He's getting into now the discussion before the statement that they released publicly that he is looking forward to exonerating himself, and we'll see how that actually happened. I see a bunch of people posting that they just subbed. Ice Queen. Chat's flying. Jessica Sunny, Annie T. Thanks everybody that's subbing now. Hit that like button if you haven't already.
Of the criminal justice system. So I said, Bryan, is it okay if we get a statement out? And
so there's a really important revelation. The lawyer asked Bryan if it was okay if we get a statement out. Now, this is potentially part of strategy, part of the public perception, making sure you don't get convicted in the public eye before you actually have a chance to defend yourself. This is the way he would handle the case. Now, the Idaho public defender immediately, we found out, was behind the filing of the gag order, which the state agreed to and all parties agreed to, but two different strategies potentially on how to handle a case like this. He wanted to go out and make a statement publicly. The Idaho public defender wants a gag order. So, that's an interesting way to kind of see the dichotomy of how this case could have gone if potentially he would have ended up in Pennsylvania the whole time.
And that's when he brought up the eager to be exonerated language. And obviously,
and I keep stopping it, so I'm going to make sure I give you this context. Then he said, and that's when, so the lawyer went to Bryan Kohberger and said, I think we should put out a statement. Are you cool with that? Bryan Kohberger is the one that brought up the language of, I am eager to be exonerated. That was Bryan Kohberger's language, his statement. Bryan Kohberger is maintaining his innocence. He's looking forward to proving his innocence. We can expect a not guilty plea, or else something fishy is going on.
that was included in the statement.
So that was him. That was him who wanted to put that in.
The eager to be exonerated was the language he used. We put it in the statement. But obviously, when I talked to him about the eager to be exonerated, to me, when we talked about it, it was more or less he was asserting innocence, but that's the language he used.
To me, more or less, he was asserting innocence. I know some of you are talking about the mic volume and stuff. I don't have it all balanced here yet. But he said he was eager to prove his innocence. He was maintaining his innocence. So even though they didn't put that necessarily in the statement, it's pretty clear from this lawyer. I mean, even though he didn't talk about the facts with Bryan Kohberger, we're going to get to part 3 of the interview now. Even though he didn't want to talk about the facts with Bryan Kohberger, he got to the fact that Bryan Kohberger was maintaining his innocence, eager to be exonerated. He was okay with making a public statement in order to try to make sure he gets a fair trial. Brianna, because the Idaho lawyer is under that gag order, I guess he is theoretically, this Pennsylvania lawyer is theoretically not under that gag order. Still interesting gray areas we're waiting in these waters, but let's get to part 3 here.
That Kohberger can get a fair trial here in
So the question was, do you think Bryan Kohberger can get a fair trial here in Idaho or here in Moscow?
In Moscow, Idaho.
There is no way he can get a fair trial in Moscow, Idaho. I don't know if he can get a fair trial in Idaho.
Just because of the attention, you think, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, due to all the media news outlets, the attention it has got.
What do you guys think? Do you think he can get a fair trial in Moscow? Do you think he can get a fair trial even in Idaho? What do you think? I mean, I think the easy answer in Moscow is no way. But what about Idaho? Because we saw Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, venue change, but not outside of Idaho.
Gotten, I mean, you're talking about an international case now, and really a social media is also an issue here. I mean, this is really one of the first cases. I mean, you had the Patino. I think Patino is correct.
Petito, right? Yeah, Gabby Petito.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Gabby Patino case. I mean, that had something like this, but I mean,
we know a little bit about that case. But yeah, he's going to dive in now to how he feels about social media. And I mean, if you had to guess, a public defender, how do you think they feel about social media and what people do in cases like this and high profile cases? What do you think? What do you think he feels about social media and its role in the criminal justice system as it stands today?
I mean, my understanding about this case, I mean, this has blown up on social media to a point where most people ages of 18 to 25 have actually posted comments on it. So I'm not on social media. I don't believe in social media. People are too free to express their really views without repercussions.
So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, when he says too free to express their views, I think he means too free to go in at people and say nasty things. I don't think he hates freedom of speech. As a public defender, that any constitutional rights, I think he would be behind, but it could be misconstrued like that. So I just wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt there with a little bit of context.
To say, and in this case, a lot of people have already expressed either guilt or innocence, and really neither helps either the prosecution or defense. Because, I mean, listen, at the end of things here, I want to make this very clear and important, and the family would really make this clear and important. Listen, there's 4 families suffering from loss, right? I mean, they will never get their loved ones back, and they want justice. Okay, but we want to make sure, everyone wants to make sure that the right guy is the one that they have at trial and the one who ultimately is convicted. Whether that ends up being Bryan or not, I can't say. The evidence will ultimately come out at trial. But the important thing is that he's presumed innocent until proven otherwise.
And just my last question, there's the hearing tomorrow morning, the status hearing, where they'll talk about the possibility of a preliminary hearing. It's my understanding the defense can waive that. Do you think there should be a preliminary hearing? I mean, if this was your case now, is that in his best interest?
Well, I mean, my understanding is it is going to be a status hearing. I had watched the initial arraignment, and I know that his attorney Taylor had requested.
He watched the arraignment too, right? Little breadcrumbs of his involvement and what he thinks and feels about this case is really interesting to me. And again, I'm not hating on it. I think it would have been a better idea to kind of break it down without revealing any of the interactions they've had, but he does add a lot of cool context where we can continue to learn what's going on in this case.
For a status hearing, but I believe the judge listed it for a preliminary hearing, so I was a little bit confused also, but I think it's been verified that it is just the status hearing tomorrow. And I absolutely anticipate there to be a very long preliminary hearing at some point, whether that happens tomorrow or in the future.
It seems like the preliminary hearing is not going to happen today. It's going to just be kind of a status hearing. But I think whenever you have a case like this with a preliminary hearing, you have to balance, the public hearing all of the evidence and convicting him and poisoning the jury pool, and it's all over. So you just waive that because you already kind of know what's coming. But a lot of times, and I think potentially in a case like this, I would want the preliminary hearing because I would want to hear all the evidence they had. I want to hear how it comes out. If anybody testifies, that's more statements that they're making that I can impeach them on if their story changes by the time it comes to trial. So you can also get a lot from a preliminary hearing. It's an interesting balance, and every lawyer kind of does it a little bit differently. 6,500 people in the chat. Hit that like button. Let's get to 3,000 likes. Let's at least get to halfway. At least half of you like the video, hopefully.
I would anticipate a preliminary hearing based upon the affidavit of probable cause. Okay. And if I circle back just a little bit, the one thing that I didn't address was the shaky ID by DM in the affidavit of probable cause. I would without doubt say that is at best a shaky ID that any defense counsel is going to have a field day with on cross-examination.
What do you mean by shaky ID?
Well, first of all, it's not an ID of Bryan Kohberger. It's an ID of a person who has an athletic, non-muscular build, approximately 5'10" with bushy eyebrows,
right,
wearing a mask. It's dark. Obviously, likely, I'm assuming it's dark. We won't know until DM actually testifies. But really, when you think about it, that's the only direct evidence allegedly putting.
So Elizabeth Gregory, the shaky ID, you can tell he's a defense lawyer. There's going to be a defense lawyer on this case, and every defense lawyer that looks at this case would call that a shaky ID, and that is going to be part of the defense. Nobody's going to blame DM, I hope. I would never blame DM for anything or how she handled it. I can't imagine what she was going through. But I think that there is no doubt that there are going to be questions surrounding the ID. And I don't think just defense lawyers would say that, actually. Actually, I know that since I prosecuted cases, as did my dad and other lawyers in our firm. So it's less than perfect, we'll just say.
Putting Bryan at the scene, if it's Bryan who's ID'd. So certainly, I can't say that it's a direct evidentiary link to Bryan. And I certainly think once examination occurs with DM, there's going to be real issues with even using her testimony.
Interesting. Well, thank you. That was really helpful.
So that's the end of the 3 parts. And to me, a lot of interesting stuff there. A lot of stuff we can talk about in the future as well. So subscribe to the channel, hit that alert bell if you're interested in this case, which it seems like a lot of you are. Like the video if you are, so we can keep talking about it. We can keep bringing the questions and the context around this story. Magical Mary asks, could he be called to testify in Idaho? I've seen it before where lawyers have been called to testify. It doesn't really seem to me like he has given any information that he'd be necessary to come and testify about anything relevant, but it's not impossible for a lawyer to come and testify in a situation like this. Johanna Leonard, how can they defend DNA? BK's DNA on the sheath inside the house next to the victims. Did the sheath get there itself? Well, as he said, the DNA doesn't say, the trace DNA or touch DNA doesn't say when he touched it, whether this was stolen, whether he let his friend borrow it, whether, let his friend borrow his car, whether he had touched this sheath before, or Bryan may know the person whose sheath that is. And if Bryan touched the sheath and was looking at the knife and gave it back to his former military classmate or friend, and then it's that person's knife, there's a lot that can still be explained. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but we need more details and more context. I don't think it's been guaranteed yet that that's his knife and that's his sheath, but it's very, very important and big and strong circumstantial evidence and direct evidence when you talk about eyewitness and DNA evidence. So still a lot to come. BK phones picked up on Wi-Fi at the scene, not during the time, it seems like, not during the time of that the crimes were committed. What could cause a mistrial in a case like this? Meggie said a million things. I couldn't go through all of them. If something pops up that could cause a mistrial, I will let you know, and I'll say this is one of the ways that this could be a mistrial. Meggie Shea, there's enough people out there not on social media that don't watch the news often, etc. Some are just too busy too. So I think there's a chance. So what's interesting is if you've ever sat through jury selection as a potential juror or as a lawyer picking a jury, the busiest of people that are not on social media, that own their own businesses, that are surgeons or whatever, and aren't paying attention to stuff like this, although a lot of them are, if I'm being honest. And a lot of you in this chat have told me, I'm a psychologist, I'm a surgeon, I'm a nurse, I'm an ER nurse, I'm an EMT, I'm a firefighter. Busy people still follow this case. But the busiest of people that own businesses that, nobody can step in for them, don't end up on juries. They get hardships out. So, it's a fine line to walk here in trying to find a fair jury. And that's really the most important thing. Be kind. How fast can we get to 2,000 likes? Well, that's up to you guys. I guess it's up to me theoretically, because you got to like the video before you hit the button. Come on, guys. He is providing you with entertainment and information. The least that you can do is click on that button. Yes. Thank you. You guys are the best. A bunch of new members here recently. Scarlett O'Hara, Brittany, and Eileen have all just joined. And the next members video is going to be pretty cool, actually, I hope. We're trying to figure out exactly logistically how to do it, but I think it's going to be really cool. Miranda, Hogue has a GoFundMe. Can you shout it out? Yes. I have not seen his GoFundMe. I do not have the link, but if he has a GoFundMe, go check it out. If you're able to, pitch in and help. I know they're going through a ton. I heard he got the rehab bed that he was waiting for. That might be what the GoFundMe is connected to. I'll see if I can find it somewhere on Twitter or on here, and we will share it for sure. And we're still praying for Hogue. Seems like he's doing a little bit better, though. Thank God. Yes, he is innocent until proven guilty, not Hogue, but Bryan Kohberger. So we have to remember that. We definitely have to remember that. Okay, I've already gone over what I needed to. I am going to be late for my next appointment. I appreciate all of you guys joining. Almost 7,000 people in the chat, which I think is as big as we've done on this case. So please subscribe if you haven't already so you can join us for future videos. We are going to go live tonight, probably around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, to talk about what happens in this hearing. Is it just scheduling? It's a status hearing. If it's short, we'll watch it together. If it's long, we will recap it and react to it and break it down. I highly doubt it's the preliminary hearing, but if it is, just get ready. Get ready. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. We're going to go off on Elizabeth. I didn't mean that. End the channel with Elizabeth's comment here. And I'm not against defense lawyers. We all need them. Was just stating the obvious. Absolutely, Elizabeth. Absolutely. Yeah, I was not hating on you in the comment. I think you were pointing out a good point, and what a lot of people think, which is what you guys do a lot, is one of you will say what so many people are thinking, which makes it great to put on the screen and discuss it a little bit more. I appreciate you and everybody else in the chat. This was awesome. I'm out of here. Hopefully everybody has a great day, and I'll see you later tonight in about 11 hours. Hit that reminder bell and subscribe if you haven't already.